She was 23, fragile in body but strong in will, with eyes that seemed to carry more dreams than her pockets could ever hold. Life had taught her early that beauty was not enough, that kindness often went unnoticed, and that people respected only those who could afford to be proud. Michael came into her world like a quiet miracle she didn't pray for. He was the kind of man who didn't belong in the part of town Lily lived in. Tall, neat, the son of wealth and ease. His car had stopped that morning because his driver took a wrong turn. He had stepped out, frustrated, only to see a girl standing by the roadside with pastries that looked too humble for a man like him. But something about her caught his eyes, maybe her quiet grace, or the humility in her posture. Or perhaps it was simply the way she looked at him without knowing who he was. He bought all her pastries that morning. It was the beginning of everything beautiful, and everything painful. For the first time in years, Lily smiled without pretending. For weeks after that, he came often. Sometimes he would buy pastries. Other times he'd just stand and talk to her, or rather, listen. He wanted to know how someone with so little could smile so freely. She told him about her dreams, finishing school, owning a small bakery, and helping her younger siblings have a better life than hers. Michael never said much about himself. He was the only son of a wealthy business magnate, living in a world where comfort was inherited, not earned. But Lily didn't care about his status. She cared about how he made her feel, seen, valued, and wanted. Weeks turned into months. People began to talk. The rich boy and the poor girl. It was the kind of story that made people whisper. But Lily didn't mind. For once, the noise of the city couldn't drown out her laughter. Michael began to change too. He started spending less time at the office and more time in Lily's neighborhood. He brought her books, food, and clothes she refused at first but eventually accepted because they came from him. He made her believe that love could cross any boundary. That maybe, just maybe, God had seen her suffering and decided to send her a gift. Her mother was suspicious at first. She warned Lily that men like Michael never kept their promises. But Lily's heart was too young, too pure, and too deeply in love to see danger in kindness. She believed in him the way a drowning person believes in the sound of rescue. When he first told her he loved her, it was under the soft glow of evening lights by the riverbank. The city's noise faded as if the world itself paused to listen. She didn't say anything back. She just nodded, tears filling her eyes. Love, she thought, didn't need words, it needed trust. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She lay awake, replaying his words again and again until they became part of her heartbeat. She imagined a future where she wouldn't have to sell pastries anymore, where her family would live in a small house with clean walls and running water, where Michael's love would be her forever. But life has a way of disguising storms in sunshine. Months passed. Michael's visits became less frequent. His messages came slower. Sometimes he would disappear for days, saying work had become too demanding. Lily didn't complain. She waited, faithfully, the way only someone who believes in love can wait. One afternoon, she went to the city's business district to deliver pastries to a customer. That was when she saw him, stepping out of his car, his arm wrapped around another woman. The woman was elegant, confident, and wore a diamond ring that sparkled under the sun. Lily froze where she stood. The world blurred around her, voices became distant, and for a moment, she felt the ground beneath her feet loosen. Michael didn't see her. Or maybe he did and chose to look away. Lily returned home that day without selling a single pastry. She sat by the window long into the night, watching the moon rise and fall. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe the woman was a friend. Maybe it was business. Maybe love wasn't as straightforward as she thought. Days turned into weeks again. He didn't come. He didn't call. He didn't explain. Her mother knew something was wrong, but Lily couldn't speak. Every word she tried to form felt like a blade in her throat. Then one evening, she saw it. A newspaper headline announcing Michael's engagement to a wealthy heiress named Catherine Adams, the only daughter of a business tycoon. There was a picture of them together. Smiling, radiant, perfect. The same smile she had once believed was hers now belonged to another. That night, something inside Lily broke quietly. Not with screams, not with anger, but with silence. The kind of silence that is louder than grief. She stayed in bed for days, her eyes swollen, her heart empty. Her world had become a place where dreams went to die slowly. She remembered every word, every promise, every gentle touch, and each one became a wound she couldn't heal. People whispered again, this time not out of envy but pity. The poor girl who thought she could belong to a rich man. The foolish dreamer who believed in love. But what they didn't know was that Lily wasn't angry, she was lost. She didn't hate Michael. She hated herself for believing he ever meant it. Months later, she tried to move on. She went back to selling pastries, but nothing tasted the same anymore. The sweetness had left her hands. She avoided the parts of the city that reminded her of him. But the world is small when you're carrying memories too heavy to hide. One morning, a black car stopped by her usual spot. It was Michael's driver. The man handed her an envelope and left without a word. Inside it was a check, a large amount of money, and a short note written in Michael's handwriting. It said nothing about love, nothing about apology. Just words that made her heart tremble. For everything you deserve but I couldn't give. She tore the check in half. Then again. Then again. She watched the pieces fall to the ground like ashes from a dream that had burned too long. That night, Lily didn't cry. She sat under the same moon they once watched together, and whispered to herself that love, in her world, was just another luxury she couldn't afford. But fate, cruel as it was, wasn't done with her story yet. She went about her routine quietly. Every morning, she rose before dawn, prepared her pastries, and walked to the same street corner where she once waited for him. But now, every honk, every passing car, every polished shoe reminded her of a man who had promised her the world, then disappeared into another woman's arms. The silence he left behind was unbearable. It filled every corner of her small home, followed her into the market, haunted her dreams. She tried to convince herself that she had moved on, but memories are stubborn. They never leave quietly. Sometimes, when she passed the glossy windows of the city's high-rise buildings, she would catch her reflection and pause. The girl staring back wasn't the same. The innocence in her eyes had dimmed. Her smile was thinner now, cautious, almost afraid to appear. Michael's betrayal had not only broken her heart, it had cracked her sense of worth. For the first time, she began to see herself the way society saw her. Poor, insignificant, replaceable. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a faint light refused to go out completely. It flickered, weak but present, as if some part of her still hoped that love could have meaning. But love wasn't the only thing that changed that year. Her mother fell sick, and hospital bills began to pile up faster than she could sell her pastries. Her younger brother dropped out of school because she could no longer afford his fees. The little stability they had left was slipping away like water through trembling fingers. Lily started working extra hours, selling late into the night, sometimes skipping meals so her family could eat. The stress carved shadows into her face, but she never complained. Pain had become a quiet companion she no longer feared. Then, one evening, fate played another cruel trick. She was on her way home after a long day when she saw a familiar figure at the entrance of a luxury restaurant. It was Michael again, this time alone, leaning against his car, scrolling through his phone. He looked older, sharper, still every bit as perfect as she remembered. For a moment, she froze. The air around her thickened. Her heart raced, but her feet stayed rooted. She wanted to look away, to walk past and disappear into the crowd, but something stronger, perhaps anger, perhaps longing, kept her still. He didn't notice her. Or maybe he did but pretended not to. He entered the restaurant, and the glass doors closed behind him, sealing her out once more. The next morning, she went to the hospital to see her mother. The doctor's face was grave. The illness had worsened, and treatment costs had doubled. Lily stood in silence, clutching her bag, as if holding on to it could stop the world from falling apart again. She walked out of the hospital, her vision blurred by tears she refused to let fall. The city moved around her as if mocking her pain, people laughing, cars gliding past, music spilling from open windows. She wanted to scream, but her voice stayed trapped inside. That evening, as she sat by the roadside stall, her tray half empty, a group of wealthy young men passed by. They were loud and careless, their laughter echoing through the air. One of them pointed at her pastries and made a joke that sent the others into laughter. She didn't respond, she simply looked away. But in that brief glance, she saw something familiar, a watch. The same limited edition watch she had once seen on Michael's wrist. The realization hit her like a wave. Among the group, laughing, carefree, was Michael himself. He looked different now, colder, more polished, like someone who had shed his humanity for success. The sight tore something open inside her. Lily left her stall that night and walked aimlessly through the streets. The moon followed her, pale and silent, as though pitying her. She walked until her legs ached, until the city lights began to fade into the distance. She ended up at the old bridge they once visited together. The river below was dark and restless, mirroring her heart. She stood there for a long time, remembering how they used to dream by that same spot, whispering hopes into the wind. Now, only her silence remained. The sound of rushing water beneath her was almost comforting. It reminded her that life kept moving, even when people didn't. But as she stared into the river, a strange calmness came over her. Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that comes after a storm has taken everything it wanted. She didn't want revenge. She didn't even want him to suffer. She just wanted to understand why love had chosen her as its lesson. Days turned into weeks again. Her mother's condition worsened, and Lily had to sell almost everything they owned. The sewing machine, the small television, even the bed frame. Each sale felt like losing a part of herself. Michael's life, meanwhile, blossomed in the newspapers. His company expanded, his new wife's picture appeared in magazines, and their grand wedding became the talk of the city. The contrast between their worlds was too sharp to ignore. But life, it seemed, had a strange rhythm. Just when Lily thought she had reached the end of her endurance, something unexpected happened. One morning, she received a letter, neatly folded, no sender's name, only her own written in fine handwriting. Inside was a job offer at a catering company. She had never applied for any such position. Confused, she almost ignored it, but the name of the company caught her attention. It was one of Michael's subsidiaries. Her hands trembled. For hours, she sat staring at the letter, wondering if it was fate or cruelty that had brought it to her door. Eventually, she accepted. She needed the money. Her mother's health couldn't wait for Pride. Her first day at work was like stepping into a different world. The building was tall and glassy, filled with people who looked like they belonged on magazine covers. She wore her best outfit, a plain black dress and old shoes that creaked with every step. As she walked through the corridors, she caught sight of Michael's photo on a company banner. He was smiling beside his wife, holding an award. The image stung, but she straightened her back and walked on. She had learned to wear her pain like armor. Lily worked quietly, efficiently, and within weeks, she earned the respect of her colleagues. But beneath her calm surface, she was a storm waiting to break. Every time she saw Michael's name printed on documents, every time someone mentioned his success, the wounds reopened. She didn't know if he knew she worked there. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't care. Months passed, and her mother's health began to improve slightly. Lily started saving again, though she barely earned enough. There were nights she stayed late, cleaning up after events, her body aching but her spirit strangely alive. For the first time in a long time, she began to feel that maybe survival itself was a quiet kind of victory. But fate wasn't done testing her. One evening, as she was leaving work, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was, Michael, standing at the end of the hallway, looking at her as if the years hadn't passed. Lily's heart stopped. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the words they never said. He looked the same, but different, tired, perhaps regretful. But Lily no longer knew how to read his face. She simply bowed her head and walked past him without a word. She didn't need apologies. She didn't need explanations. She needed distance. Yet, as she walked away, she felt his eyes following her, and deep within, something began to stir again. Not love, but the ghost of it. That night, she couldn't sleep. The past had returned, not as a memory but as a shadow that refused to leave. She wondered why fate kept circling her back to the same man who had broken her. Maybe it wasn't about love anymore. Maybe it was about closure. Or maybe it was just another cruel trick life was playing on her. Whatever it was, she knew one thing: the echoes of betrayal never truly fade. They just change their tone, waiting for the day they can be heard again. And for Lily, that day was coming. The building she worked in now had his name engraved on every wall, printed on every document, whispered in every corridor. No matter how much she tried to focus on her tasks, The weight of his presence lingered like perfume she couldn't wash off. She had thought she was strong enough to face the ghost of her past, but strength, she was learning, is not the absence of pain, it's surviving in spite of it. The next few weeks blurred into a quiet routine. Work, home, sleepless nights, repeat. But deep inside, a quiet unease began to grow. Something felt incomplete, unresolved, as if life had unfinished business with her heart. One late evening, Lily stayed behind after an event. The catering hall was empty, the scent of food still lingering in the air. She was cleaning the last table when she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart tightened, the same way it always did whenever silence was interrupted. She didn't turn immediately, but when she did, her body went cold. It was Michael. He stood there quietly, dressed in his usual elegance, but there was something different about him now, a heaviness in his eyes, a tiredness that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than exhaustion. For a moment, neither of them moved. The distance between them felt like years. Lily lowered her gaze and continued cleaning. She had promised herself she would never break the silence between them again. But his presence was louder than words. He stepped closer, but she refused to look up. The air between them thickened with everything they didn't say. After a while, he left without a word, just as he had once left her life. That night, Lily couldn't stop trembling. Not from fear, but from the sudden reminder that pain never truly dies. It just waits in the shadows, patient and quiet, until it finds a moment to return. The next day, she went to work as if nothing had happened. But she could feel eyes following her, whispers, glances, unspoken questions. The world, she realized, has a cruel fascination with the quiet suffering of others. Weeks passed. Michael began appearing more often in the building. Sometimes she saw him walking through the halls, other times standing at a distance during events, watching without speaking. It was as if he wanted to reach out but didn't know how. Lily ignored him, but her heart didn't. Every glimpse of him tore open another wound she thought had healed. She told herself that his attention didn't matter anymore, that the only thing she owed herself was peace. But peace was difficult when the past kept knocking on her door. One afternoon, as she was about to leave for the day, her supervisor called her into the office. She had been recommended for a temporary position at one of the company's luxury hotels, a higher-paying role that involved managing event meals. It was an opportunity she couldn't refuse. The next week, she started the new role. The hotel was breathtaking, marble floors, golden lights, the kind of place where dreams dressed themselves in luxury. Lily moved like a shadow through the elegance, focused and quiet, her emotions buried beneath her professionalism. Then, on a warm Friday evening, fate revealed its next cruel twist. The hotel was hosting a charity gala, one of the biggest events of the year. Guests from across the country were expected. Lily's job was to supervise the catering team, ensuring everything ran smoothly. She didn't know who the hosts were until she walked into the main hall and saw a massive banner hanging above the stage. The event was organized by Michael and his wife, Catherine. Her breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to spin for a moment, but she steadied herself. She couldn't leave. It was her job. All she could do was stay invisible and do what she was paid to do. Throughout the night, she moved silently between tables, serving food, checking details, avoiding attention. But her eyes, despite her best efforts, betrayed her. They searched for him, and when they found him across the room, standing proudly beside his wife, her chest tightened. He looked happy, at least, that was what the world saw. But Lily noticed something else. Behind his polite smiles, his eyes looked restless, unfocused, like a man haunted by something he couldn't escape. There was a moment, brief but powerful, when their eyes met across the crowded hall. In that instant, time froze. The laughter, the music, the chatter, everything faded. There was only the quiet recognition of two hearts that once beat together and now stood worlds apart. Lily quickly looked away and returned to her duties. But the encounter left her shaken. The night ended, the guests left, and the hall grew silent again. She remained behind to clean, the echoes of the evening still lingering. As she bent to gather empty glasses, A folded piece of paper slipped under one of the trays. It was small, neat, and addressed to her by name. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The note contained only a few words. "Meet me tomorrow. The Old Bridge. Noon." No signature. But she knew who it was. The next morning, she tried to ignore it. She told herself she owed him nothing, not even her presence. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. By noon, she found herself walking toward the bridge, her heart pounding with each step. The sun was high, the water below calm and clear. When she arrived, Michael was already there, leaning against the railing just as he had years ago. He looked different, the glow of wealth still around him, but there was something hollow behind his eyes. Lily stood a few steps away, waiting, silent. She didn't want words, she wanted closure. She wanted to understand why he had returned. Michael spoke, his expression unreadable, but she didn't respond. She simply watched him, her heart quiet but heavy. He looked at her like a man standing before a mirror that reflected everything he had lost. After a few minutes, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. She hesitated, then took it. Inside was a photo, an old picture of them together, from the early days when life was still kind. She stared at it for a long time. It was strange how something so small could hold so much pain. When she looked up, Michael was gone. He had left as silently as he had come, leaving her alone with the ghosts of what used to be. That night, Lily placed the photograph on her table. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just sat in silence, listening to the hum of the city outside her window. It was then she realized something she hadn't before. Closure doesn't always come from apologies. Sometimes it comes from accepting that some stories are meant to end unfinished. The next day, she went back to work as if nothing had happened. The photo remained on her table, a quiet reminder that love, no matter how deep, can vanish without reason. But somewhere deep inside her, something shifted. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt free. Not happy, not healed, but free, and that was enough. However, life had one more card to play. 2 weeks later, news spread through the company like wildfire. Michael's marriage was crumbling. His wife had filed for divorce amid rumors of infidelity and betrayal. The tabloids went wild. The same papers that once praised his perfect life now tore it apart. Lily read the headlines with a quiet stillness. She felt no joy, no vengeance, only pity. She folded the newspaper, placed it beside the old photograph, and whispered a silent prayer for peace. For him, for herself, for everything they had destroyed in the name of love. It had all begun so innocently. His visits started as casual check-ins, small gestures that grew into something deeper. He made her laugh when life seemed too heavy. He brought food when she was too tired to cook. Sometimes he just sat with her, listening to the sound of her silence. But beneath all those visits was a promise she never thought would break, a promise of forever. As days turned into weeks, his presence became her habit. She could no longer imagine mornings without his good wishes or evenings without his gentle knocks at her door. And even though the betrayal had burned her deeply, her heart still held fragments of him, unwilling to let go of the man she once thought would never hurt her. One quiet afternoon, her small apartment sat in perfect stillness. The sun hung lazily above the city, pouring golden light through the thin curtains that danced with the breeze. Michael came again, unannounced, just as he used to. He knocked softly at first, expecting her to open the door with that familiar smile, but there was no response. He knocked again, this time with uncertainty, but still, silence met him. Concern crept into his thoughts. The door wasn't locked, so he pushed it open slowly. The room was dim, carrying the faint scent of soap and lavender. He walked further inside, his footsteps careful on the cracked floor. He called her name softly in his heart, his eyes scanning the room. The worn-out chair she loved to sit on, the table stacked with notebooks, the tiny window where she often watched the world go by. Everything about the room whispered her name. Then he saw her. She stood near the corner of the room, just beside the mirror. A white towel clung loosely around her chest, drops of water sliding down her shoulders. Her skin glistened under the fading sunlight, her hair damp and wild, sticking to her neck. For a moment, she froze. The towel was the only thing shielding her vulnerability. Their eyes met, hers wide with shock and silent tears, his filled with longing, guilt, and something deeper he couldn't name. She felt her breath quicken. The air between them thickened with the weight of everything left unsaid. His gaze lingered, not on her body, but on the pain he had caused, the love he had broken, and the woman he could never truly deserve. She wanted to speak, to scream, to push him away, but the storm inside her heart silenced every word. The tears she had been holding back for days finally broke free. They streamed down her face, each one carrying pieces of her heartbreak. He moved closer, not with the boldness of desire but with the weakness of a man haunted by regret. She trembled, her hands clutching the edge of the towel as though holding on to the last piece of her dignity. But emotions are stronger than reason. When hearts are wounded, even pain can feel like home. One step drew him nearer, and another tore down the invisible wall between them. His arms wrapped around her fragile frame. Her body stiffened, then melted against his chest. The scent of his cologne mixed with the faint fragrance of soap from her skin. Memories of their past overwhelmed them both. The laughter, the warmth, the dreams that once filled this very room. The next moments blurred between tears and tenderness. His lips found her forehead, tracing paths of sorrow and apology. Her sobs softened into silence as her heart betrayed her once more. Their bodies spoke a language of grief and longing, the kind that words could never capture. In that room, the broken pieces of love reunited, not in forgiveness, but in weakness. They made love, not because they were whole again, but because they were both lost and searching for something familiar in the wreckage of what once was. Afterwards, the silence returned, heavier than before. She lay still, wrapped in the thin bedsheet, staring at the ceiling as if answers were hidden there. He watched her from the edge of the bed, guilt clouding his thoughts. There were no smiles, no warmth, only the cold realization that some wounds are too deep for love to heal. He left quietly, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than any goodbye. From that day, Lily's heart carried a weight she couldn't share. Every time she saw him afterward, shame crawled over her like a shadow. She couldn't meet his eyes without remembering that moment. Not the love, but the weakness. She hated herself for letting him touch her again, for surrendering to the same man who had betrayed her soul. Yet, despite the shame, part of her still longed for the comfort of his arms. Weeks drifted by like blurred pages in a forgotten book. The morning she discovered she was pregnant, the world seemed to spin slower. The test lay still in her trembling hand as tears blurred her vision. Her heart pounded against her ribs, and the walls of the tiny apartment seemed to close in around her. She felt a strange mix of fear, disbelief, and heartbreak. The same man who shattered her world had unknowingly planted another life inside her, a life she neither planned nor imagined. She sat on the cold floor, hugging her knees as tears soaked the hem of her dress. The silence of the room seemed alive, whispering her regrets back to her. Every sound outside, a passing car, a barking dog, a child's laughter, reminded her of a world that kept moving while her stood still. She wanted to scream, but her voice was buried under the weight of it all. That night, Lily lay awake, staring into the darkness. The memories of that day at the bridge, his eyes, his touch, his betrayal, all of it replayed in her mind until the lines between dream and reality blurred. Somewhere deep inside, she wished she could erase that afternoon when he entered her home, erase the moment their eyes met, and erase the weakness that followed. But the truth was unchangeable now. The love that once bloomed in her heart had turned into something else, something heavier, deeper, and impossible to undo. At work the next day, she could barely stand. Her hands shook as she folded clothes, and her co-workers threw curious glances her way. When her boss asked if she was feeling unwell, she simply nodded. There were no words for what she was feeling. That night, she walked aimlessly through the city streets. The lights from passing cars painted her face in shades of sadness. Couples held hands, laughing under the yellow glow of street lamps. Their happiness felt like mockery. She thought about Michael again, his home, his wealth, his charm, and how easily he had moved on, while she carried the scars of a love that refused to die. When she finally reached her apartment, she collapsed on the bed. The night stretched endlessly before her. Her mind was a storm of thoughts, the shame, the fear, the questions without answers. She wondered if she should tell him. Part of her longed to, not for help, but for acknowledgement, to make him see the consequences of what he had done. But another part of her refused. She couldn't bear to face his eyes again, couldn't stand the thought of being pitied or dismissed. Days turned into weeks. The signs of her pregnancy grew stronger. The nausea, the dizziness, the strange cravings. She tried to hide it, wearing loose clothes, keeping to herself. Her reflection in the mirror became harder to look at. Her face had lost its glow, replaced by exhaustion and quiet sorrow. Weeks later, she received an invitation that turned her world upside down. It came through social media, a post tagged in her feed. Michael and his wife were expecting their first child. The news was everywhere, wrapped in perfect pictures and sweet captions. Their smiles beamed from every photo, radiant, beautiful, and false. Lily stared at the post until her eyes blurred. Her breath came out shallow. It was as if the universe was mocking her. She, carrying his hidden child in silence, while he celebrated a new beginning under bright lights. Her heart cracked in ways she couldn't describe. She deleted the app and sat in the darkness, hugging her stomach as tears slid quietly down her cheeks. From that night, something changed in her. She stopped hoping for his return. She stopped replaying memories of their past. The man she had loved no longer existed. He had died the moment he chose someone else. All that remained was his shadow, and the child growing inside her, innocent and undeserving of the pain that brought it into the world. As her pregnancy advanced, her body grew weaker, but her heart began to harden. She no longer walked through the city with her head down. She started saving whatever little money she could. Her dreams had shrunk from fairy tales to survival, but she clung to that purpose like a thread. Every night, she talked softly to her unborn child, her hands resting on her belly. She promised to love it, even if the world didn't. She promised never to let it feel the same emptiness that had consumed her. But deep down, a quiet fear lived in her, a whisper that told her life was not done testing her. There was a strange stillness around her days now, like calm before a storm. But no amount of pride could hide the pain forever. One night, after her mother had fallen asleep, Lily's body gave in. The pain in her stomach grew so intense that she could barely breathe. She clutched the edge of the bed, her body shaking with each wave that rolled through her. She lay there, hoping it would pass, but the pain only increased. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Her mother woke up to Lily's cries, her hands trembling as she helped her daughter into a cab. The hospital was only a few minutes away, but the trip felt like an eternity. The city streets passed in a blur of headlights and rain, the sound of the tires against the wet asphalt a dull hum in her ears. Every bump in the road made her wince, every second feeling like a lifetime. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Lily was rushed into an examination room. Her heart pounded as doctors moved swiftly around her. Her mother stood at the door, her face pale, her hands clutching the railings as if she might collapse. Lily could hear nothing over the sound of her own breath, shallow and frantic. Her thoughts raced, but they were a chaotic mess. She couldn't think about what might happen to her. She couldn't think about anything except the life growing inside her. The doctor returned after what felt like hours. He wore a stern expression, and Lily's heart sank. "You're lucky you came in when you did," he said. "You're dealing with complications. You're severely dehydrated, and there's some internal bleeding. We're going to keep you here overnight for observation." Lily nodded numbly, barely hearing him. Her mother stepped closer, her voice trembling as she asked about the baby. The doctor didn't say much, but the way his eyes flicked to Lily's stomach told her everything she needed to know. The room seemed to close in around her. Hours passed as Lily lay in the sterile bed, the cool air from the window seeping through the cracks in the room. She stared at the ceiling, unable to move, her mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. Would the baby survive? Would she? The pain in her body was a constant reminder of how fragile everything had become. She couldn't remember how long she had been lying there when a soft knock came at the door. It was her mother, holding a cup of water. "You need to drink this," she said softly, her voice full of concern. Lily took it without a word, her hands shaking. She couldn't look her mother in the eye. How could she? How could she explain to her that she had let herself fall for the same man who had shattered her world? Her mother didn't ask about Michael. She didn't have to. They both knew that the man who had once promised Lily the world was the same one who had turned his back when it mattered most. He had a new life now, a life with someone who wasn't her. But Lily, despite everything, still longed for him. The baby inside her, too, was his, a constant reminder of the love that had been, the betrayal that followed, and the silence that had consumed her. The next morning, Lily's condition stabilized. The bleeding had stopped, but she remained in the hospital for observation. She spent most of the day in a haze of exhaustion, her body too weak to fight back the overwhelming emotions that clung to her like a second skin. Her mind drifted, as it often did, back to Michael. The night they had made love, the promises he whispered to her, how for a brief moment, she had believed everything would be all right. She had let herself be a fool. She had believed his apologies, his regret, and let herself fall victim to the tenderness of a man who never truly cared. The sound of footsteps at the door jolted her from her thoughts. She turned to see a nurse standing there, but behind her, there was a figure that made her heart stop for a second. Michael stood in the doorway. His face was drawn with worry, his eyes darker than she had ever seen them. He wore the same well-tailored suit, but it didn't matter anymore. He wasn't the man she once knew. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time seemed to stretch, each second feeling like an eternity. Lily's chest tightened, the emotions inside her swirling like a storm that refused to calm. He stepped forward, hesitantly, as if unsure of how to approach her. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said, his voice low, almost pained. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" She couldn't speak. She just stared at him, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need his pity. She didn't need him to tell her he was sorry. She had lived with his lies long enough. But there was something about the way he stood there, unsure, that made her heart break all over again. Michael reached for her hand, but she recoiled instinctively, as if his touch burned her. He withdrew quickly, the pain in his eyes sharper than anything she had ever seen. He stood there for a moment, lost in thought, before he finally spoke again. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. "But I did. I can't change that. He trailed off, unsure of what else to say. Lily didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence between them was louder than any words could be. She knew this man. She knew the lies he had spun, the promises he had broken. And yet, despite everything, her heart still ached for him. After a long pause, Michael turned to leave, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But before he walked out the door, he turned back to her one last time. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice barely a whisper, before he disappeared down the hallway. Lily watched him go, her heart heavy with regret, with anger, and with sorrow. The pain of losing him, of falling for him again, was too much to bear. And yet, she had never felt more alone.